Hi there. This time I'm going to talk about a mighty important phrase from the Gettysburg Address. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. You've probably heard that phrase before. It was uttered by Mr. Lincoln about a century and a half ago. And you know, Mr. Lincoln was a kind man at heart. It must have pained him terribly to know that in a sense he had created the death of so many hundreds of thousands of human beings. He reconciled that by saying that there was something worth dying for. That in an experiment that had begun 87 years earlier, a nation had been founded by people seeking liberty and freedom in a place where all humans would be recognized as being created equal. He summed up the crisis of his time with a warning that if goodness did not prevail, government of the people, by the people, and for the people would perish from the earth. That is a mighty powerful phrase. It sums up eloquently the reason for the war and more importantly, the idea on which our nation was founded and the ideals toward which we as a nation has striven all these years. The good news is that it has not perished from the earth. The form of government so radical 87 years before Abraham Lincoln has taken root in many countries all over the world in the century and a half since the Gettysburg Address. The bad news is that it is almost extinct within Mr. Lincoln's home country. Remember, it is government of, by, and for the people. Well, let's look at this. Now there is still a government in Washington, and it actually has a whole lot more control over the lives of the people than it did in Mr. Lincoln's day. So there is government of the people. But it's no longer government by the people. And it certainly is not government for the people. Today's Congress is composed of professional politicians who don't give a damn for the good of the people they are supposed to represent. Most of them are lawyers, and their campaigns are paid for by cabals of corporation and clubs of wealthy aristocratic families. If they lose an election, instead of going home and becoming one of we the people, they become lobbyists and work directly for the evil forces who bought and paid for them with campaign funds. For the most part, our legislators don't even write the laws. They don't do them themselves anymore. They just sign off on what they're told to do by their rich owners, and, well, most of the work is done by lobbyists. Now, Congress was never perfect, but never before has our government strayed so far from its purpose and design as described in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Gettysburg Address. Well, this all started about 40 years ago with the election in 1980 of a very slick huckster working for the Cabals of corporation and the clubs of wealthy aristocratic families. I call him Ronnie Rodeo, and I talk a lot more about Ronnie Rodeo in some of my other videos, but well, basically, Ronnie was an insidiously likable con man. He attacked our democracy with radical Republican revolution that was nothing less than a complete reversal of direction in the course of American history. And Ronnie was told what to say and do by those same cabals of corporations and clubs of aristocracies. The presidents who followed Ronnie were, for the most part, owned by the cabals and members themselves of the clubs. Now, Barry O.B., he was something of an exception. He promised change, but of course, the owners of Congress hog-tied him and business went on as usual. Don won, you remember this, by promising change, as well as riding a wave of hatred, frustration, and racism. But he's a whole lot easier to control than Barry was. The cabals and clubs just surrounded him with a kind of a rotating core of their minions to feed his ego, very important for this guy, and make sure that he used tightly to their agenda. And that, in a nutshell, is how government by and for the people has changed in the last four decades actually, to government of the people by the lawyers and lobbyists and professional politicians for the cabals and clubs, corporations, and wealthy aristocracies. Now, America was never perfect. Well, until Mr. Lincoln's time, many of our states practiced the most insidious form of chattel slavery. Women only got the vote in the 1920s. Social Security didn't happen until the 1930s. But it wasn't until 150 years after the Civil War that we even started to come to terms with the racism that slavery and that bitter conflict left in its wake. But we have striven to move forward, expanding the American dream, both in the number of people who can benefit from it and the human rights which it covers. I describe this in greater detail in some of my other videos. That is, we have striven in that direction until 1980. Since that time, with some remarkable exceptions, we have been moving backwards. Ronnie Rodeo's radical Republican revolution has been in charge for almost 40 years. It's time for a counter-revolution. Government of the people by the lawyers and lobbyists and professional politicians for the cabals of corporations and clubs of wealthy aristocracies must be replaced. Counter-revolution. Now. I thank y'all for your attention. I hope it has been helpful. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I hope you'll join me again sometime.